My name is Ben Shapiro. I'm a principal on the transportation program at the Rocky Mountain Institute. We are a global nonprofit focused on transforming energy systems. And a big way in which we aim to do that is working with different companies and public sector entities around market-driven solutions. And so I think this topic of vehicle to everything, which we're about to dig into, is a great example of that. I'd like to start with just a little bit of an introduction on the topic. I think that this crowd from the last couple of sessions, I'm assuming is relatively savvy on these topics, but just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. And then I will introduce our esteemed panel here and let them share some of their experience in this space. So when we talk about vehicle to everything, I think let's step back a little bit, and I'll try to do this quickly. There's always a risk in this space of sort of getting into alphabet soup. But I think the broader category here is vehicle grid integration, right? So how do we use these electric vehicles that we're seeing more and more of on our roads, both from light-duty passenger vehicles all the way up the chain to medium, heavy-duty Class 8 electric trucks. There was a reference to this from Pepsi in the Central Valley, I think, on the panel, the previous panel here. And so within that, there are a variety of different ways in which we can take advantage of the batteries in these vehicles. Everything from relatively simple managed charging, what's sometimes called V1G, to more sophisticated and likely more valuable opportunities for bidirectional charging. So that encompasses what people may be familiar with around vehicle to grid, called V2G, vehicle to home or vehicle to business, other acronyms we don't need to list out, vehicle to load, powering certain appliances. So there's a whole slew of different ways in which we can take advantage of these vehicle batteries for things other than just providing transportation services. There's a lot of value there, and we're going to dig into sort of how we can untap more of that and scale this in the future. Before I introduce the panel here, the last thing I want to say is just to provide us with a little bit of a sense of scale of this opportunity. So right now, here in California, we have somewhere around 2 million electric light-duty vehicles on the roads. And that's about a third, probably a little bit more than a third of all of the light-duty electric vehicles in the US. If we assume that each of those has about 60 kilowatt hours in its battery, that's on the small side for most of the vehicles being produced today, but let's start small. That is about 120 gigawatt hours of stored energy. By 2030, we hope to have 5 million light-duty EVs in California, which would bring us to somewhere on the order of 300 gigawatt hours of stored energy. And again, I think this is a little bit conservative. We may well surpass that goal for vehicle adoption, and we may also see many of those vehicles have larger batteries. And to compare that to some other, probably more familiar numbers, or the numbers themselves likely not familiar, but we've talked a little bit about residential and commercial stationary storage. Right now in California, I think that there's likely less than 10 gigawatt hours of capacity there. So we're talking about an order of magnitude difference here with the resources that we can take advantage of from these vehicles. And I think there's a lot of promise there. I'm looking forward to digging into this with the panel today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over here, and maybe we can just go down the line. Russell, Lynn, Kristen, brief intro on yourselves, what you're working on in the V2X space, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Russell Vare with the Mobility House. Did about half my career at automakers and half at different vehicle to grid aggregators. And now joined the Mobility House last year, which is a software company headquartered out of Munich and U.S. offices in Belmont. So we're having a happy hour tomorrow for Climate Week at our office if you want to come join us tomorrow afternoon. We have charge management systems for fleets, where we operate about 2,000 fleets worldwide. And then we also have aggregation and flexibility for how to leverage EV batteries in these different use cases. We have telematics-based smart charging in Europe. We've launched vehicle to grid with Renault in passenger cars in Europe. And we've also now in the US getting started on school bus bidirectional fleets that were going in the ground this year, and also starting to add passenger cars with the project in Massachusetts that will get started this year too.
Thanks, Russell. So Lynn Ames, I'm with General Motors, and more specifically the GM Energy business unit inside General Motors. I'm the head of utility and energy market business development. And so what that means is, as GM produces this awesome EV lineup and GM Energy produces charging stations and residential storage, what can we do with that in partnership with utilities, in partnership with aggregators, in order to create value for the customer, support the grid, and really push forward adoption of EVs. Prior to GM, I was actually at a smaller aggregator company as well for about a decade, and then was able to learn a lot in Europe and Asia and here in North America, and light duty and also medium heavy duty, and bring all of that learning to General Motors. So excited for the panel today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Landry. I work at Pacific Gas and Electric, the local utility here. I sit on our vehicle grid integration team within clean energy transportation. We have a whopping 12 of us working in this space, so I get to focus exclusively on bidirectional electric vehicles. So I lead our residential vehicle to everything pilot, which I'll talk about. And prior to this role, I worked at the California Public Utilities Commission, so our regulator, on Rule 21 interconnection, which is the rules for connecting customer generation, which includes storage, to the distribution level grid. And so internally, I work on PG&E's strategy around vehicle to everything interconnection.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I think that between the three of the panelists here, we have a nice sort of well-rounded perspective here. Automakers, the utilities, and some of the leading technology that's really making all of this work, sometimes more in the background than many of us see, but a really critical piece. So I'd like to structure this sort of in two main parts. Let's talk for a few minutes about the current landscape. What does V2X look like today, both here in California and perhaps more broadly? And then in a few minutes, I think we'll come to a little bit more of a forward-looking, how do we scale this? What are some of the barriers we can overcome? So in terms of the landscape today, I think it's safe to say that there's a growing amount of attention being paid to vehicle grid integration generally and vehicle to everything programs more specifically, both from state legislatures. In a few states, there's been legislation passed to require utilities to procure more of this, to streamline interconnection of these resources, and also from public utility commissions trying to sort of figure out some of the implementation of this here in California and elsewhere. And part of that, we're also seeing more programs come from a number of utilities and from partnerships with the automakers and with technology providers to make those programs work. There's been some attention paid in the last couple months to a new program in Massachusetts through their Clean Energy Center, which I think is going to be interesting, trying to bring some of this value to more customers in that state. So I'm hoping to start things off here, maybe with Lynn and with Kristen, talking about the partnership that your two organizations have here in California and PG&E service territory, where GM has recently joined PG&E's V2X program. So maybe we could just start there, get a little bit of a description of what the... Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's start there, maybe get a description of this program that PG&E and that GM are partnering on here as part of the V2X program that PG&E has.
Great, thanks. So back in May of 2022, the CPUC approved a set of 3 pilots. So we have a residential vehicle to everything pilot, a commercial corollary, and then a vehicle to microgrid pilot. And so the residential pilot has a goal of enrolling 1,000 residential customers, which is the largest V2X effort in the US, if not the world. But what sets this effort apart in my mind, having to run it, is that we are offering customers choice in the equipment that they use to participate. So this is not a all Nissan Leaf or all Ford F-150 pilot. This is offering customers right now the Ford F-150 Lightning and now a number of GM autos that they can use to participate. So there's options there, which means that there's a lot of work on the back end for us to figure out how to make all of these systems work together. We are testing 2 different use cases. So one is the emergency backup power when the grid goes down, allowing the vehicle to provide backup power to the home or facility. And then grid-tied use cases, true V2G in response to an hourly changing rate.
Yeah, and from a GM perspective, I mean, we're excited. I think, as many of you probably know, we now have 9 EVs in our lineup that we've rolled off with confidence that have V2X capability, which is so cool. And so speaking about giving choice for GM, it's also important for us to give our customers choice. Yes, we still have ICE vehicles, and now we have this awesome EV lineup that has bidirectional capability. And the best way to showcase that, we think, is by doing these really incredible and innovative programs with utilities and with aggregators. So we're super excited to lean in and participate in the PG&E program that we just launched in March on the 13th. So if you live in the area and are interested in the program, please go check it out. But the other cool thing that it offers is an incentive off of the V2H system that GM Energy sells. So you think about, you have the EV, you have the V2H system, and you want an incentive maybe just to push you over the line to go ahead and participate in the program. So I think that's just another groundbreaking thing that the CPUC funding as well as PG&E are putting in front of customers to help push forward the market and hopefully customer interest.
Where Mobility House is today in California, in the fleet side, is we have a few school districts that are in PG&E service territory. There's part of a California Energy Commission grant, and we have our interconnection applications in with PG&E. And we have another one that's kind of unique. It's a transit bus in Oakland that's going to be doing backup power for resiliency. So I think where the fleet market is it's still really early. I think that I would say just the fleet market is early, let alone the bidirectional fleet market is early. So most of it is definitely in the school bus segment. So I think in one essence, it's very early. There's not a big market yet. But in terms of what we're seeing in the school bus side, there's some maturity there that we already see happening, where we're seeing multiple EVs with bidirectional capability, multiple bidirectional charging stations on the market that are interoperable with multiple vehicles. So we're starting to see a little bit of maturity in the technology side on the school bus market, even though it's pretty small.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit here about the value, and within this there's a value proposition for different entities. So I'm hoping maybe, Kristen, you could tell us a little bit about the value as PG&E sees it from the utility perspective, and then Lynn, if you could follow up thinking about the value to customers, since they're fairly distinct.
Yeah, so at PG&E, we have our True North strategy, and part of that is clean and resilient energy for all. So this technology has benefits to every part of that statement. So clean, bidirectional electric vehicles enable us to bring more renewables onto the grid and make better use of those resources. And EV adoption in general replaces ICE vehicle use. And in California, when transportation represents 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions, that is our largest sector to be addressing. So EV adoption is a really big push for PG&E. Clean and resilient energy for all. So part of the bidirectional capabilities that we're supporting with bidirectional electric vehicles is the ability to provide resiliency. When the grid does go out, these resources can provide days of power to customers. So really in service of making outages invisible to our customers. And then finally, clean and resilient energy for all. And every EV, all of that extra load that we're bringing on as we electrify the transportation sector, all of that load helps us to reduce rates across the board for customers. And with those resources being bidirectional, we then have the ability to also better utilize the grid assets that are out there. So being able to orchestrate at the distribution level the charging and discharging of these batteries is a very big resource for us beyond the system level capacity that they provide.
Yeah. And then for GM, right, I think what we're trying to do in partnering with utilities is either create programs or participate in existing programs that are going to offer our customers value that value could be incentives and rebates off hardware. It could be incentives and rebates off the EV, off the installation. It could be cost savings on your bill based on managed charging, and then really paving the way, right, to vehicle to grid, where then you could actually have your customer, making money, if you will, in different ways. And so, we've clearly launched with PG&E and are super excited about that program. We launched with other utilities in the past, NRG, where we have a free nighttime charge plan that we launched in December. We also have collaborations with aggregators, and we've announced at least one of them publicly, which is Energy Hub, where we are also looking at incentives and rebates off of our residential storage product for customers who are interested in resiliency. In addition to like the cost savings and money making area, it's also about customer experience. You're buying a GM EV, and this is where we're starting. And what comes along with that? Do you want OnStar and the other features and functionalities of the vehicle? Cool. Do you want awesome floor mats or whatever it is that you're into? That's great. But you can also get cost savings off your electricity bill. You can also have a differentiated customer experience through our partnerships on the back end with aggregators and with utilities, offering something that's different and hopefully something that brings customers, joy through their EV.
On the fleet side, I think what's really different is that for fleet, it's all about just the economics. Like, is there a value on their operations for adding bidirectional charging? Yes or no, right? And so versus passenger cars, this backup power use case is not the same calculation, right? Backup power, you're really comparing about people buy cars not for just value, right? People buy cars for a lot of reasons, and backup power, I think, has some substitutes like generators or residential battery, but some of it just may be they want it. And so, or they value resiliency really high. And so with backup power, if you're not familiar, so maybe just for people who aren't as familiar with bidirectional charging, backup power use case and vehicle to grid require kind of very different aspects. Like for backup power, you need different components. You need grid forming inverters, transfer switch, backup battery to turn systems on. So you need like different components. And there's also a difference in like the interconnection. With islanded systems, you don't necessarily need an interconnection. And so for fleet, they're really not looking at backup power as a use case. And so it's really about, is there a revenue stream that makes it worth the incremental investment in vehicle to grid? And I think we're starting to see, prices of bidirectional charging stations come down to where it is like an incremental investment, and we can get to the point where it can just become the default decision to just make it bidirectional as the market matures.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I think that's an important point to underscore here, especially for commercial operators. We all know, I think, that EVs have historically commanded a price premium, and while that's come down, it still is very much a barrier for some of the larger vehicles. And so any ways that we can find to provide additional value from things like vehicle to grid or vehicle to X, if you want to use the broader term, can be really impactful in terms of moving those decision makers at fleets towards electric vehicles, which I think has a lot of knock-on benefits from emissions standpoint. So I'd like to turn a little bit towards talking about sort of the future and what some of the current barriers are to scaling this beyond where we are today. I think there's been a lot of good progress in this space, but we hope to go bigger, right? It's probably fair to say for all four of us that we see a lot of potential value here in the sort of future energy system coming from these vehicle batteries. And so let's maybe break that down into a couple different categories. I don't think we want to get too deep in the technical weeds, but maybe we can touch on some of these pieces briefly. And maybe I'll just leave this to whoever wants to pick it up to start with, because there are a few pieces in here. I think historically some of the challenges have been around interconnecting these vehicles to the utility and sort of going through the requisite processes. So talking a little bit about what those processes look like today and what barriers could be removed there. And then a different flavor here, I think, is around the standards, right? So making sure that all of the technology that has to work well together is truly interoperable between the vehicles and the chargers, utility systems, and so forth. So put a couple of big questions out there, and would love to hear some perspective on sort of how we can overcome those barriers.
Yeah, and I'll add one, because I know Kristen is the interconnection expert over here, so I'll let her weigh in. But also, I think like death by pilots. I think we've really showcased pilots upon pilots upon pilots. And so if we can move away from that to scaled programs, I think that that's really important for us as we look to scale together. And then from the OEM perspective, absolutely, interconnection has been something that we are trying to figure out. We actually have an interconnection team that sits right next to me, and we spend a lot of time with the utility interconnection teams across the U.S. trying to figure out how they're different, how we can help our customers go through this process. So for us, definitely wanting to lean in more, and I know we are part of a lot of working groups and consortiums to really band together to do that.
Yeah. So one of the things, I guess, on the note of interconnection that I'll note that we've been successful at with GM is, given this technology is capable of grid-tied operations, Rule 21 is the interconnection pathway for GM's product, which is a backup power product, can be installed so that it disconnects the home from the grid when the power goes out. And so it's operating in a space that is more akin to backup generators and things that fall actually outside of Rule 21. And so we've done testing with GM in our territory to allow this technology that is capable of grid-tied operations to be installed without going through the full Rule 21 interconnection process, so long as it is being installed as backup generation. So we have cleared that installation and energization pathway for GM's system, as well as the Ford F-150 Lightning system. Other hurdles that we've, as an industry, I think more recently overcome as far as certifications and standards go. We now have a few new products on the residential side that have gotten their UL certifications and have been given the safety stamp to. So those are coming to market. And then I think in the longer term, there's a lot of work being done on standards for what we call interoperability, which is what we hope the future looks like, where any vehicle can plug into any charger and get these functionalities through the standard communication protocols.
I think one other aspect of interconnection that we're looking at is cost. And so it's very different depending on which service territory you're in, the process and the cost of interconnection. So like in California, it's about $800, I believe, for a interconnection, which on the fleet side isn't usually that big of a deal for a large school bus project, but versus for passenger car, it's high. Versus another market that we're working in, it's $40. And so I think that we see that like the cost that is going to be part of the business case and the process for interconnection. So there's a whole technical aspect too that I think was kind of mentioned, but I think there's also this like process and cost thing that will need to be addressed as it market grows.
One more question in this vein. Historically, to my knowledge, there's been kind of an ongoing discussion, and I'm not quite sure where it is today. So I'm hoping you three can educate me and the rest of us here a little bit. But the discussion around sort of sub-metering and using the vehicle and the charger data itself to measure energy input and output here, sort of charging and discharging. And yeah, I think that would be interesting to hear kind of your view on where things are today and what might need to change to enable more of that going forward.
So as I said, we have a 12-person vehicle grid integration team, which means that I have a colleague whose job it is to work with the CPUC on what we're calling sub-metering. So the sub-metering protocol is what we're testing out to allow us as the utility to be able to rely on third-party data streams for that measurement and billing purposes. So a little outside my wheelhouse, but it is it does have a dedicated person working on it.
Yeah, it's a topic that baffles me. I mean, I think that it's like there's a lot of value from submetering, and it's hard for reasons that I don't fully understand. Because I mean, like the way that it operates in Europe. I mean, you can just measure it from the device, and it doesn't seem to be the same complexity from what I've seen in Europe versus the U.S. So I think it brings value if you can, from what I've seen, if you can submeter the vehicle or the EVSE, you can really, I think, quickly incentivize people in terms of like how they provide load flexibility when they can measure it directly from that device.
Great, thank you. And for anyone less familiar, EVSE is another word for chargers, electric vehicle supply equipment. Again, alphabet soup up here, but I think that's the case throughout most of the energy sector in my experience. Okay, so thank you for humoring a little bit of technical discussion there. I'd love to turn from there to similar kind of question around opportunities and sort of barriers that could be overcome from a policy and regulatory perspective. So from each of your respective vantage points in the industry, what kind of support would be most useful if we want to try to reach this vision of a really robust V2X ecosystem down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think from that standpoint for the automaker, we are hoping for continued support at the PUC level for continued funding into programs. And we are, willing, again, to do what it takes on our side to show that we're going to show up. We are continuing our investments in EV as GM. We are not backing down from that today. We continue to push forward and continue to work collaboratively with industry stakeholders in order to move things forward in a way that is collaborative and that, again, like has the customer in mind, is benefiting the customer and is helping to support the grid. And so I think it's continued CPUC and PUC in general support, funding, collaboration with our partners in order to move forward the right policies and regulations on the utility side that will allow this to keep accelerating, especially with other changing landscapes that might be out of our control.
Yeah, I think I want two things. I want rates that value export power, and I want or programs with longevity. So I think when like the conversation that I've had the last 10, 15 years on this topic is that, like why would an automaker or charging station maker invest in bidirectional charging? Say, well, there's value in it. And they say, well, how much? Well, it's either zero or I'm not sure. And I think that if you have a rate or if you have a program that's not going to sunset in 2 years, then you can kind of communicate, hey, there's value. And then the industry can like build towards predictability. So I think those are the two tools I think would create some predictability of value that's here. So I guess, there needs to be value for it, right? We can't just like pay for export power, but if there is value for export power, like be able to have some long-term consistency so people can build to it.
Yeah, I'd say definitely agree with the sentiments. We are learning a lot through what we're still calling pilots. We, I think, would like the flexibility to continue to run these pilots. They are operating as mini programs at this point to get the learnings that will prove out this technology to various stakeholders and help us learn how customers interact with it and what the value is to all of the parties so that we can present that value in full-scale programs.
Maybe just to add on a little bit to especially what Russell just said, like at GM, they literally, and I wasn't there when this started, but created an entire business unit called GM Energy in order to understand all of this, right? And they hired a bunch of us from the energy industry and said, okay, we're GM, we make cars. We need help on all that other stuff. So can you help us figure it out and figure out who to partner with? But on the flip side, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? Because I was just in meetings here in our Mountain View office where that's actually exactly the exercise we're going through. Okay, Lynn, you're telling us this is what it looks like with PG&E and select utilities in 2025. What does it look like in 2026, 27, 2030? And how can General Motors plan for that? Because just like utilities, our planning season, as you all know, is like 8 years, 5 years, 3 years, depending on what feature or functionality or whatever in the vehicle. And so we have to be able to attempt to be able to predict that in longer term programs is one way to do that. And of course, collaborations together is part of it.
So maybe building a little bit on that, sort of you're talking about programs with PG&E and trying to get a better vision of what's coming down the pike here. And Russell, a couple minutes ago, you told us a little bit in the context of submetering how things are simpler in Europe. Are there things that here in California we could be learning from other markets in terms of how they're approaching vehicle to everything as an opportunity? And when I say other markets, I mean both other U.S. states that are making strides in this, but also, of course, a broad international experience in the vein of being here at SwissNex, I suppose.
So my conversations with other utilities across the U.S. typically center around V2X interconnection. And I think Russell called this out on having the most expensive interconnection fee in the country. And that is part of Rule 21 that's in the text that is governed by the CPUC. But what I'm listening for is from these other utilities, how are they looking to simplify it? How are they able to make this interconnection process more streamlined, more similar to that batteries are using? So those are the conversations that I'm listening to.
Maybe I'll weigh in just quickly. So for GM North America, we also, have great connectivity with PG&E's executive team, Mike in the back there, and Patty and the whole team, and then connectivity to other utility CEOs as well. And we do make connections because we think it's important for everyone to collaborate. And so we have, an East Coast utility, for example, their CEO wanted to come in, meet with our team and our exec team, and wanted to ask us, like, what are your learnings? We saw you announce with PG&E. Can you tell us more about that? And how can we implement something like that? And we're like, yeah, absolutely. But also talk to PG&E. Here they are. And let's try to collaborate. Even though the markets are different, there's definitely learnings around program design, around, I would say, like customer experience, the journey through enrollment. There's all kinds of things that everyone is trying to figure out in the best way possible, the best way to do it. But also, hopefully, we're putting the pieces together to learn from each other, not only on interconnection, but also on programs overall and customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's looking to California. Yes, we can learn stuff from other people, but PG&E has one of the biggest pilots that there is. There's dynamic rates that are out there. There's Energy Commission grants that are funding this, and like colleagues and industry colleagues in the audience that are working on this. So I think a lot of people are looking to California to see how it works. But I would say a couple of the lessons to learn. We've been seeing a lot of growth in Massachusetts with the Connected Solutions program, which is a demand response program that kind of has that fixed value over a long period of time. So I think people can understand and see, like, okay, I can calculate the value there. So I think that again would point to that topic. And then, I don't know. I think the other thing might be, not to go on too different of a tangent, but like AC vehicle to grid, which is where there's two ways you can do vehicle to grid. You can have the inverter inside the vehicle or the inverter inside the charging station to do the power conversion. And so in Europe, we're seeing a lot more AC bidirectional charging and just kind of still at the, still haven't got there on the standard side for the US. But I think that's another area to kind of look around the world and see. Because one of the things that is always been challenging with this topic is that automakers are global and utilities are hyper local. And so I think it's like hard for the auto industry or charging station manufacturers that are global, that are trying to build for the world and then have to meet a specific requirement in one service territory is like been very challenging. So I'd say maybe there's more technology sharings that can happen across markets.
Yeah, I think there are around 3,000 individual electric utilities in the U.S. So difficult to do that sort of on a one-off basis, I have to imagine. Okay, well, I want to save some time for audience questions here, but maybe my last prompts to the three of you, kind of a two-parter here. One, I'd love to hear if you have any sort of contrarian views. You work deeply in this space. Is there anything that you think about V2X that maybe isn't a commonly held belief? no is a perfectly acceptable answer. And the other piece, maybe a little bit more generic, what you're most optimistic about in the V2X space and sort of looking towards scale.
I'll go first. To me, I think we don't need everything to be bidirectional, right? Like you mentioned, the number of gigawatt hours that we'll have on the grid. Like we really only need to tap into a small percentage of that for this to be successful. So kind of not looking at bidirectional charging as all or none. I think it's fine if we just have this in some niche applications. And I think there's some new exciting, as more things get electrified. Like I've talked to people doing, electric boats and electric RVs and all kinds of other things that sit parked even longer than are cars we drive. So I think I'm really optimistic for we can be really successful with just a small portion of things being interconnected.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, coming from working at small companies my entire career and spending almost 10 years at an aggregator and really learning a lot, but going through all the bumps as you do when you're in a small company, to taking the job at GM. GM is taking this very seriously, and I'm super excited to be a part of that journey. They keep doubling down on investments and the portfolio and the EV lineup. And to me, that only points to one thing, and that's scale. And that can happen with companies like ours, like PG&E, and the workhorses, the aggregators that are, kind of in the background doing a lot of this work. And so I'm just excited that I finally feel like we're moving off top dead center where we were for a long time and are hopefully pointing towards scalable V2X. And that could be V2H, like you were talking about earlier. It could be V2L, V2G. You're right. It doesn't have to be for every use case or application, but there's definitely an application and there is an opportunity. And I think that's now.
Yeah, for sure. So sitting up with two long-term veterans in the space, I've been working on this in a dedicated fashion for the past 3 years here at PG&E. And in that relatively short amount of time, we've moved from pilots, meaning one-off projects that we are figuring everything out for the first time, to the pilots we're running now, which are built as mini programs. We're looking to scale to 1,000 customers. And there's been a lot of work, I think, in the background on the back end that isn't being seen as realizing the vision of having electric vehicles as part of the smart home ecosystem that we've all had in our heads for so long. But there are things that are starting to shift and really, I think, get to the point where we will see movement that is recognizable. So I'm really excited about 2025 for this space.
Great. Thank you all so much for humoring my questions. We have about 10 minutes left to go out to all of the audience questions. So I see a hand here. Bonus points if you can do it in the form of a haiku.
Probably not. Sorry. So 2 questions. So one for the future. In general, if we roll the clock forward a couple of years, thank you, can we assume that the incremental cost, both in the EV and the charging side, is fairly moderate, such that this becomes ubiquitous for new vehicles and new EV chargers? Second question, less optimistic. Can we assume that those of us who already have existing EVs and existing EV chargers, there's no practical way without replacing both pieces of the puzzle there to get the benefit of V2X?
I can go first. So as we are developing these new vehicles, as we are working with charging station providers, we are always looking for continuous improvements on our product. So it's really a test and learn of the market, a test and learn of the product, a test and learn of the pricing, a test and learn on the incentives and the rebates. So will it continuously improve? Absolutely. And that's part of the process we're going through. On the second part of the question, from our perspective, I can say that assets that are deployed have the opportunity to be upgraded via software. And so it doesn't mean that you have to replace your EV, and I'm not a charger manufacturer, or replace your charger, I would say. So I think those are areas that we also continuously work on and look forward to make sure that we're helping with future-proofing, right, of the assets that are deployed.
I think 2 years is a good time frame to be at least have like a lot of options on the market, right? Like how much the prices are going to come down, I'm not sure in 2 years. Since everything's going to probably have tariffs attached to it, but I would say that like you would have a lot more choice on the market in terms of vehicles and charging stations that are out there, and I think that 2027 is a year where we'll start to kind of see more scale.
I'm curious how the additional battery cycling is impacting warranty or longevity of the EV battery, and then how you all are addressing that from your different perspectives in this.
I'll let GM go first.
This is not my wheelhouse, but we definitely have an entire, battery team, actually led by Kurt Kelty, who actually is here in the Bay Area, who spends a lot of time with the whole battery lab doing testing and making sure that we're protecting our vehicle, right? So GM's motto, I would say, is always safety first. And today, anyway, with the use cases that we're seeing, we are not seeing damage to the vehicle or to the battery. But again, we will test and learn and iterate and update any products and or warranties accordingly going forward.
I mean, as I've seen third-party studies that range from like 1 to 5% state of health impact over 5 to 10 years. And that is just, there's so many variables that it's really hard to nail down, right? Like, what's your C rate? Are you discharging at 10 kilowatts at home and charging at 300 at a fast charger? What's the calendar age? What's the temperature? There's just so many factors that go into it that, it's very early. There hasn't been a ton of data on that. I would say what I've seen in the industry is that I've seen automakers taking different approaches to how to warranty that. Some are saying it's, okay with this charging station, or you have this much throughput through the battery. So I think there's like more to come on that piece. But I think overall, it's not a lot to worry about, but it's more just this commercial question of like, how do you address the warranty?
Yeah, and I think it's evolving, right? Like for us, we're working with certain charging stations today, but as Russell was mentioning, and Kristen too, there are going to be more on the market. And so figuring out how to work with them in the right way so that they are approved to work with our vehicles, approved to work with the batteries, and that everything is safe is a part of the process.
I got some eye contact down here in the fourth row that suggests there's a haiku waiting for us.
Thank you. When we talk about vehicles, we always think about cars or other earth vehicle, but here in the Bay, as we have in Europe also a lot of waterways, there are all the electric boats that are coming. How do you position yourselves towards that, knowing that waterborne mobility is increasing, and how you handle the off-the-grid charging solutions, if you have any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think my focus obviously is residential passenger cars. I do know that our ferries here in the Bay are at least transitioning to electric. I have spoken to an electric aviation company around charging and discharging their batteries for battery health purposes. But I can't say a lot on the additional infrastructure to help them charge.
Maybe I can ask GM to make boats next.
Okay, I think time for one more question. Yeah, over here.
Perfect, thank you. It's Kurt with Renew Home. I guess my question is specifically on a 5-year, maybe kind of a 10-year time horizon. Do you guys see more of an opportunity really kind of unlocking this specifically vehicle to grid opportunity, or just getting the mass of customers to respond to managed charging, just kind of more of a traditional program, but just like total size of the prize for grid impact, size of the prize for the consumer?
I think for us today, we really have started with the building blocks around managed charging. We have been doing managed charging programs since 2022 and have learned a lot, right? And so started with EV telematics managed charging and are now moving towards vehicle to home and V2X and V2G in the not so far future. So I would say we're building the stepping stones. And as far as a timeline, I can't quite commit to that, but it is coming. And I would say it's sooner than you think.
Yeah, from a fleet perspective, our main product is a CMS, a charge management system. So like 100% of vehicles are managing their charging. So I think that that's default, definitely default for fleets. And I think it should be default for passenger car. And that this, bidirectional charging should be additive on top of that.
And so at PG&E, our True North strategy has 2030 goals of supporting for PG&E out of our share of California, 3 million electric vehicles by 2030. And we have a goal of 550 megawatts of flexible load. So for that, definitely including managed charging. But I think the potential for bidirectional vehicles to contribute to that is really big. So looking forward to moving forward with the pilots that we're running now and launching full-scale programs by 2030.
I do think we could fit in just one more here. Sorry, back here first.
Great panel. Okay, here's the haiku. Is V2G firm, solid like ice, but not ice? What will you measure? And just if that's too cryptic.
Oh, bravo. I get it. I still, it's like, how firm of a resource can you plan on with something that's a mobile asset?
Yes, and particularly for these programs, what are you trying to learn about reliability, and what are the specific key metrics that that PG&E uses to assess firmness of the resource?
Yeah. So the Vehicle to Everything program that I'm running now has, as part of the use case that we're testing, a dynamic rate. We are examining what California calls resource adequacy, the ability to count on load reduction or exports from resources. But we are not connected to the CAISO market as part of these pilots. So our pilot dynamic rate has generation, transmission, and distribution costs all rolled in there. So we are trying to get at really what is the value of these resources at any given time to the utility grid. But capacity is not something that is part of these pilots, at least.
And on our side, in addition to what Kristen said, we're also interested in understanding customer enrollment numbers. Like, is a program like this enough to get customers to move? We hope so. And how many? She mentioned 1,000 vehicle caps. So how many customers will enroll in what timeline and through what customer messaging and outreach methods? We leverage at General Motors our brands. So we're working with Chevy, we're working with Cadillac, we're working with GMC to get approvals, and we have them in, notifications, customer messaging, whether that be email or in-app notifications or forums like this. How are we reaching customers? How is it working? And how can we then duplicate that effort going forward is also of interest to us.
I think the goal of it, as an aggregator, is to provide some reliability on what that is. And so there's, I have some data that I've seen about like what that looks like at scale of how much you can count on for V2G. So find me after and I can send you that.
All right. Oh, Kristen, Lynn, Russell, thank you so much. I think we need to call it there, but please join me in giving these three hearty round of applause for an interesting panel.